And on this International Women's Day, make us keenly aware of the mothers, daughters, and small girls whose lives are in imminent danger at the hands of the enemy. Hear their voices and amplify them, that we would respond to their cries for freedom and safety. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, observing the wicked and the good. Let not then the secrets of evildoers be hidden from your watchful eye, but to you may each give account for their iniquity. We stand before you today with hope for your mercy and the promise of your salvation. In your sovereign name we pray. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadeo.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will now entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute.
And your dedication. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute. The approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. And now the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Lee.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And the chair will now entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address our body for 1 minute, please.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today in response to the President's State of the Union address. While the State of the Union was the focus last night, today I'm more concerned about the state of the President. Just hours ago, the President of the United States stood in this very room right behind me and told one of the greatest tales that I've seen in modern history, attempting to tout optimism, curbed inflation, and secure nation. However, this flailing, incompetent chief
companies in the city, a son, a brother, a husband, a father, and a friend, Jason was committed to putting his life on the line each day for the community that he loved. As our city mourns his tragic loss, we are once again reminded of the bravery and the sacrifice it takes as a first responder. While Jason is laid to rest this Friday, our hearts are heavy, and our thoughts are with the Arno family, the Western New York community, and his brothers and sisters of Buffalo Professional Firefighters Local 282. The City of Good Neighbors and a grateful nation are forever indebted to firefighter Jason Arno for his selfless sacrifice. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revising and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week, the Washington Times featured a thoughtful open letter from Clifford D. May, President of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, to President Biden. Quote, "Dear Mr. President, first, kudos to you for going to Kyiv. For the past year, you've been providing the Ukrainians enough weapons to prevent them from losing, but not enough to drive out the Putin invaders. Why not ask such military experts as retired General Jack Keane what's necessary to get the job done as fast as possible? The moral argument for supporting Ukraine is obvious, but you still haven't made clear why its defense is vital to American national interest. Their rulers of imperialist Russia, Communist China, and Islamic Iran share a goal that the diminishment, if not the death, of the United States." End of quote. In conclusion, God bless our troops who successfully protected America for 20 years as global war on terrorism continues moving from the Afghanistan safe haven to America. Congratulations, Ambassador Georgi Panyatov, for the Library of Congress National Bulgaria Day reception. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The contribution of women run deep throughout the history of America and the fabric of our entire nation. One such woman was Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery and dedicated her life's mission to ensuring freedom for others. Building a network of abolitionists, Harriet Tubman organized safe houses throughout the Underground Railroad, in my district, while making rescues and freeing others who were previously enslaved. As she put it, there are one or two things that she had a right to: liberty or death. Madam Speaker, on International Women's Day and 2 days before Harriet Tubman Day, when we remember her, and when we look at young girls in Afghanistan, and we look at young girls in other parts of the world like Iran seeking to have education, we remember Harriet Tubman. When we fight for equal pay for equal work, we remember Harriet Tubman. When we fight and advocate for a woman's right to choose, we remember Harriet Tubman. When we help those mothers that try to seek asylum at the border with their children, Madam Speaker, we remember Harriet Tubman. Let's remember her today as we celebrate Women's International Day. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, it is my honor to rise and celebrate the life of one of the greatest Florida men to have ever lived, Louis Bair. Lewis was a legend for all times. He was a prolific businessman and an even more prolific philanthropist. Lewis was CEO of Florida's oldest privately held company, the Lewis Bear Company. It was started by his grandfather in 1876. He grew this small family grocery distribution business to one of Florida's largest beer distributors. So if you've cracked open a beer in my district, there's a pretty good chance that Lewis moved it. His generosity did not stop with libations. Through the Lewis Bear Family Foundation, he donated tens of millions of dollars to local organizations and charities, including hospitals and nonprofits focused on curing childhood cancer. He single-handedly protected the Deepwater Horizon oil spill settlement funds for Northwest Florida and saw that the money was used for lasting economic development. I know that he will be sorely missed by our family, by his, Belle Bear, their 3 children, Lewis, Cindy, and David. Northwest Florida will never be the same without Lewis Bear. We are certainly grateful that we had my friend for 82 years. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today as an educator who spent 10 years as a college instructor and administrator to support the President's Student Debt Relief Plan, which is now currently under threat by the Supreme Court. Now, when I was in the classroom, I saw my students taking out loans to pay for basic needs like rent or food. We tell our young people to get an education, to go to college, to work towards your chance at the American dream, but for so many, that means taking out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. Student loan also disproportionately impacts low-income students, and millions of students may not have access to financial training or advice. To this day, I am also paying off my student loans, and I have former students who continue to struggle with student debt years after they've graduated. Yes, we need to do more to address college affordability and access, but we must address student debt. If the Supreme Court takes a dangerous, irresponsible step of ending relief to student borrowers, then Congress has a duty to codify the President's debt relief plan and protect these 40 million Americans. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purposes does the gentleman from Idaho seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I ask unanimous consent for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not long ago, America was the largest energy producer in the world. Gas was affordable, and groceries weren't worth an entire paycheck. These are not faraway memories from our country's bygone golden era. This was the reality for Americans just a few years ago. Government spending has increased over $9 trillion since President Biden has taken office. This predictably resulted in the highest inflation in 4 decades. American families have had to bear the brunt of this crisis, yet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle still seem to have no plan to tackle inflation outside of spending more taxpayer money. House Republicans have been clear about our mission in 2023. Set our fiscal house in order so that we can lower the cost of living for Americans. We can find solutions to our joint debt crisis by working on new budgetary framework focused on fiscal restraint. Republicans' commitment to America offers tangible solutions to set us on that path, from strengthening our supply chains to enacting pro-growth policies. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I rise to address the House for 1 minute and request permission to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, last month I had the opportunity to visit the Port of Galilee in Narragansett, Rhode Island, one of the most productive commercial fishing ports in the entire Northeast. Galilee is home to more than 270 commercial fishing boats, supporting 3,500 jobs and landing more than 16 million pounds of seafood per year. As a member of the Natural Resources Committee, I am committed to fighting for resources for America's ports and to support the commercial fishing industry, which is vital to how we feed our nation and support our economy. And I am also introducing a bill to secure a voice for the Rhode Island fishing industry in the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. I am proud to support and fight for Rhode Island's fishermen in Congress, and encourage everyone to try the best seafood in America, which is Rhode Island seafood. Thank you very much.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of Judge Francis Seckinger, who passed away on March 2nd. And I might note that it is appropriate on International Women's Day to honor a great judge. Judge Seckinger served in the judicial system when she was elected as a probate judge in Effingham County in 1977. That election sparked the beginning of a long and fruitful career of public service until her retirement in 2008. It's also important to note that Judge Seckinger's election made her the first female to hold an elected position in the Effingham County judicial system. Outside of her public service, Judge Seckinger was a faithful attendee of Springfield United Methodist Church, and she enjoyed hobbies such as crocheting blankets for friends and family. Judge Seckinger's selfless career of community service and her love for family and others should serve as an inspiration for all of us. My condolences go out to Judge Seckinger's family, and I hope they know how grateful I am for her years of service. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Democratic Caucus, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 205. Resolved that the following named members be and are hereby elected to the following standing committees of the House of Representatives.
Resolution be considered as read.
Without objection. Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that it be in order at any time to consider House Concurrent Resolution 21 in the House if called up by the Chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs or his designee, that the concurrent resolution be considered as read, that the previous question be considered as ordered on the concurrent resolution to adoption without intervening motion, except for 1 hour of debate equally divided among and controlled by Representative McCall of Texas, Representative Meeks of New York, and Representative Gates of Florida, or their respective designees, and that the provisions of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution 50, U.S. Code 1546, shall not apply to House Concurrent Resolution 20.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 199 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 5, House Resolution 199. Resolved that at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved to the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 140 to amend Title V United States Code to prohibit federal employees from advocating for censorship of viewpoints in their official capacity and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Oversight and Accountability now printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-1. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 2. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 27, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title V United States Code of the rules submitted by the Department of the Army, Corps of Engineers, Department of Defense, and the Environmental Protection Agency relating to revised definition of waters of the United States. All points of order against consideration of the joint resolution are waived. The joint resolution shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the joint resolution are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the joint resolution and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure or their respective designees, and 2, one motion to recommit. Section 3. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, Senate 619, to require the Director of National Intelligence to declassify information relating to the origin of COVID-19 and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence or their respective designees. And 2, 1 motion to commit. Section 4. The provisions of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution 50 U.S.C. 1546 shall not apply to a concurrent resolution introduced during the first session of the 118th Congress pursuant to Section 5 of the War Powers Resolution 50 U.S.C. 1544 with respect to Syria. Section 5. If a veto message is laid before the House on House Joint Resolution 30, then after the message is read and the objections of the President are spread at large upon the journal, further consideration of the veto message and the joint resolution shall be postponed until the legislative day of March 23, 2023, and on that legislative day the House shall proceed to the constitutional question of reconsideration and dispose of such question without intervening motion.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 1 hour.
For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Representative McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to amend the pending resolution with an amendment that I have placed at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Massey of Kentucky. Strike Section 4 of the resolution and redesignate the subsequent section accordingly.
Without objection, the resolution is amended. The gentleman is recognized. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. Last night, the Rules Committee met and reported House Resolution 199, providing for consideration of 3 measures, H.R. 140, H.J. Res. 27, and S. 619. The rule provides for H.R. 140 to be considered under a structured rule with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on the Oversight and Accountability, or their designees. The rule further provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 27 under a closed rule with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Additionally, the rule provides for consideration of Senate 619 under closed rule with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Select Committee on Intelligence. Finally, the rule postpones the vote on a potential veto message from the President on H.J. Res. 30 until the legislative day of March 23rd. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. I thank our colleagues on the other side of the aisle for working with us on that unanimous consent, which I think is important. It is important for us to have a full debate and a full airing of the use of war powers in the United States. As James Madison pointed out, it was critically important that we put that power in Congress. We should have this debate. If we're going to have troops in Syria, this body, this House of Representatives, this Congress ought to speak to it. And we shouldn't hide behind a 2001 authorization of the use of military force and not update that authorization of the use of military force. I'm not here to say whether we should or should not be in Syria. I am here to say that Congress should speak to it. We should debate it. We should decide. We should have an actual conversation in this body, on this floor, when we're going to place our men and women in uniform in harm's way. That is the point that we should be considering. I very much believe that the gentleman from Florida has brought something forward using privileged tools that we have here in the body, and that we should take that under consideration. We should support the resolution the gentleman has brought forward, and if we have concerns, we should then have a debate, a full-throated debate about the use of military force and our men and women in uniform in Syria. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Texas. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Last night, the Rules Committee met and reported out a rule for 3 bills. And first, let me just say this is an awful rule. And I don't want to hear my Republican colleagues talk about fairness or openness ever again. We got lecture after lecture about how they wanted to be more open and more inclusive. Well, guess what? So far in this Congress, 22 of the 26 rules have been completely closed. I mean, there's more closed rules in this rule than Democratic amendments made in order. Speaker McCarthy promised he would open things up, but he's locked things down more than ever. And my colleague from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, said that he joined the Rules Committee to be, and I quote, our conscience. So I would ask him, I mean, does he think this is okay? 43 of 44 amendments submitted by Democrats were blocked by his majority. I mean, is that right? Is that the openness that we were promised by his speaker? Bottom line is, last time the Republicans controlled the House, they had more closed rules than any other time in the history of our country, and they're on track to beating their own record. Our first bill today, considered under a closed rule, is S-619, the COVID-19 Origin Act of 2023. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that we all want to know how COVID started. But I also want to point out for the record that Donald Trump was president when COVID started, not Joe Biden. And Donald Trump said, and I quote, "China has been working very hard to contain coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well," end quote. Joe Biden didn't say that. What Joe Biden actually did do is he ordered this investigation. And thanks to his investigation and the work of the intelligence community, we now have a report that gives us some answers. The gentleman from Kentucky says Democrats all believe this was a conspiracy theory, yet strangely enough, it was a Democratic president who told the intelligence community to look into the origins of COVID. So I'm just a bit confused here as to his logic. I'll mention quickly 2 other bills. H.J. Res. 27, also considered under a closed rule, seeks to roll back a majority of the protections on rivers, lakes, and streams that have been implemented since the creation of the Clean Water Act. And I find it particularly ironic that Republicans go to East Palestine, Ohio, saying, "We stand with you, we're with you," while here in Congress they're passing a bill that makes it easier for the company that dumped toxic waste into their rivers to get off scot-free. Finally, we have H.R. 140, the Protecting Speech from Government Interference Act, which does not protect free speech from government interference. In fact, it seeks to expand the First Amendment to include Vladimir Putin and the Chinese Communist Party, while telling America's own federal law enforcement agencies that they are now forbidden from even notifying social media companies of attempts by Russia and the CCP to spread propaganda. But there's one more thing I want to bring up today, Madam Speaker, and it's not in this rule, but it's just as important and consequential for our democracy. On Monday of this week, Fox News aired an offensive, dishonest, shameful representation about what happened on January 6, 2021. For nearly an hour, Tucker Carlson said that January 6 was not, in fact, a violent attack on American democracy. In fact, he said it was not an attack at all. He called it a, quote, peaceful sightseeing day, downplayed what happened, tried to sanitize and gloss over the first responders who were attacked and died, called the people attacking our Capitol police officers, and I quote, meek, ran interference for a racist mob that came into these halls that day to overturn an election. And I'm furious, because I was here that day. I was literally in this room as one of the last ones off the House floor. I sat in the Speaker's chair that day. I saw how close we came to disaster. And I don't need Tucker Carlson or anyone else to tell me what happened that day. And I'm furious, and I'm not just furious for me, I'm furious for the people he lied to. I'm furious for the memory of the officers he insulted. I'm furious for the police officers who were beaten and injured that day. I'm furious for the staff who thought that they were going to die. January 6th was an attack on our democracy, and now Tucker Carlson has chosen to side with the enemies of democracy. But what's most alarming about all of this, what's most dangerous, is that he was aided and abetted by Republican Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. I have to say, this is a new low. Speaker McCarthy's treacherous decision to coordinate with Tucker Carlson to deliberately distort what happened that day is beyond the pale. And the worst part is the blatant lying. On November 21st, 2020, Carlson said in private text that lies about voter fraud were, and I quote, shockingly reckless, and called the very conspiracy theories he was promoting on the air as insane and absurd to his colleagues. He called those propagating the big lie, and I quote again, dangerous as hell. He knew that claims the election was stolen were dangerous lies. But instead of owning up to the truth, he went on TV. And with zero respect for his viewers, and for the people of this country, zero respect for the truth, zero respect for our democracy, he sold those dangerous lies to the American people. He should be ashamed. And Speaker McCarthy's disgraceful decision to help him spread these lies will forever be a stain on this institution. So my question for the Speaker is, was it worth it? Was the backroom deal with the far right to help Tucker Carlson lie about what happened that day worth the damage done to our democracy? Was it worth insulting the memory of the law enforcement officers who died defending this building and what it symbolizes? The family of fallen officer Brian Sicknick doesn't think so. I want to enter their full statement into the record today, but our rules prevent me from doing that. So let me just read a part of it here. And I quote, "The Sicknick family is outraged at the ongoing attack on our family by the unscrupulous and outright sleazy so-called news network of Fox News, who will do the bidding of Trump or any of his sycophant followers, no matter what damage is done to the families of the fallen, the officers who put their lives on the line, and all who suffered on January 6th due to the lies started by Trump and spread by sleaze-slinging outlets like Fox," end quote. They go on to say, and again I quote, "Every time the pain of that day seems to have ebbed a bit, organizations like Fox rip our wounds wide open again, and we are frankly sick of it," end quote. That's what Speaker McCarthy is doing here, and it's sick. And it's indefensible, and frankly, I find it disgusting. So when the hell will House Republicans stand up here and say, this is wrong? At least some Senate Republicans, to their credit, have actually denounced Carlson's lies. Senator John Kennedy said, and I quote, "I was here. It was not peaceful. It was an abomination." Senator Tom Tillis says, Tucker's depiction was BS. He called it indefensible. Senator Mitt Romney says you can't hide the truth by selectively picking a few minutes out of tapes and saying this is what went on. It's so absurd. It is nonsense. It's a very dangerous thing to do. But all we get out of this side of the Capitol is deafening silence. And every moment House Republicans do not come out and condemn these evil lies, more damage is done to the fabric of our democracy. Because mark my words, January 6th will happen again if we do not correct the record and tell the truth about what happened that day. It was an attempt to overthrow the government of the United States based on lies spread by the former President of the United States. And so for the sake of this institution, for the sake of the country, it is time to tell the truth. And for my Republican colleagues, it is time for you to condemn these lies. And with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation, H.R. 140, which went through regular order, which was marked up in the Oversight Committee, where Democrats had copious opportunities to offer amendments and to change the bill, as did Republicans. H.R. 140 is called the Protecting Speech from Government Interference Act, and it would prohibit federal employees from using their official authority to censor a private entity, including outside of normal duty hours or away from an employee's normal duty post. Under President Biden, administration officials and federal bureaucrats have abused their positions, authority, and influence to encourage censorship and erode Americans' First Amendment rights. Recently released reports have uncovered efforts by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Centers for Disease Control, the Department of Homeland Security, and other government agencies to pressure social media companies and internet providers to censor and remove speech posted on social media platforms. Advocates for this censorship flagged certain posts and users as spreading misinformation on various topics, including COVID-19, racial justice, and the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Executives at Facebook and Twitter have admitted that prior to the 2020 presidential election, after warning from the FBI, they censored the sharing of news regarding Hunter Biden's laptop leak, which has since been proven true. It was not a Russian disinformation campaign. Even former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, during a July 2021 press briefing, called on Facebook to ban specific accounts from its platform. Congress should recognize that the biggest spreader of misinformation over the last several years, whether it's been about elections or about COVID, has been the federal government. The censorship must stop. Congress must restore constitutional protections enshrined in the First Amendment. H.R. 140 and the amendments that are pending votes here as well are critical to ensure that government officials can never again promote censorship and pressure private entities to suppress Americans' First Amendment rights. Additionally, the rule before us provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 27, a resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5, United States Code, of the rules submitted by the Department of Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Defense, and the Environmental Protection Agency relating to revised definition of waters of the U.S. It's Groundhog Day again in America. Every time the administration changes, this rule changes. The Biden administration's new rule would radically redefine the term waters of the United States to expand the federal government's authority in regulating bodies of water. Specifically, Biden's EPA would expand the term to include impoundments of jurisdictional waters, tributaries, adjacent wetlands, and additional waters. To be clear, what the Biden administration is pushing through here will heap serious burdens on farmers, small businesses, home builders, and rural communities across our country. In 1972, Congress didn't tell the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, do whatever you think is necessary to protect water. That's not what the bill said, yet that's what they've taken as their directive. The Clean Water Act was never intended to be applied as broadly as the Biden administration is proposing. Every member of Congress should be concerned about the EPA's attempt to expand its authority over individuals' private property and regulate farms and communities, even those which lie far away from any lakes, rivers, or streams, and very far away from Washington, D.C. Congress has the constitutional authority and responsibility to provide oversight and to review regulations issued by the executive branch. If the executive branch promulgates rules that could overstep their authority, as President Biden is doing here, it is vital that we exercise our oversight authority in Congress. Finally, the rule before us provides for consideration of Senate 619, the COVID-19 Origin Act of 2023, which would finally declassify any information relating to potential leaks between the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the origin of COVID-19. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, anyone who spoke out questioning whether COVID-19 might have come from the Wuhan lab in China was denounced as a conspiracy theorist, and their words were labeled as dangerous misinformation. People were censored online, their accounts were suspended, and their reputations were damaged for questioning the origins of COVID-19. What's the difference between COVID-19 conspiracy theory and the truth? About 2 years. We've seen them call natural immunity conspiracy theories. We've seen them call people who said that masks don't work a conspiracy theorists. And now we're finding out that all of those conspiracy theorists, so-called, were accurate. Fast forward to today, even the government admits it. The Department of Energy and the FBI have both publicly reported their conclusions that COVID-19 likely emerged as a result of a lab leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a research institute in Wuhan, China, controlled by the People's Republic of China, and ultimately the Chinese Communist Party. And was it funded in part by our government? Yes, it was. This legislation is long overdue and is necessary to expose the truth about the origins of COVID-19. Americans deserve to see the information. President Biden could have released this information at any point. It could have been released a year ago. It could be released today without this resolution. But this resolution is important because the president has not released this information. The last Congress, led by Speaker Pelosi, could have voted to do what we're doing here today. But no, they wanted it to remain hidden from the American public. I fear the federal government has been involved in a cover-up about the origins of COVID-19 because they are afraid of being exposed as culpable in the creation of the disease at the center of the pandemic. And to my colleague's point about the videos that were released on Monday, I think the other side of the aisle is out of touch and out of step with the American public on this. A recent poll by Rasmussen showed that 81% of likely voters believe that all of the tapes should be released. The Democrats had 2 years to release these tapes, but 81% of voters believe that. Is that just Republicans? No, 86% of Republicans and 78% of Democrats, they're out of step with their own party, believe that these videotapes should be released because Americans deserve to know the truth and the defendants in these trials deserve to have the evidence they need to present their defense. I urge my colleagues to support this rule and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I want to put a few things on the record, if I could. I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a USA Today piece entitled Fact Check, COVID-19 Vaccines Primarily Designed to Prevent Serious Illness and Death.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record an AP News article entitled Ex-Twitter Execs Deny Pressure to Block Hunter Biden Story.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, Twitter itself is saying the government isn't telling them to suppress anything. This is yet, unfortunately, just another Republican conspiracy theory. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from The Hill entitled Trump Officials Roll Back Obama Oil Train Safety Rule. Madam Speaker, on February 3rd, 2023, a train with 38 cars derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. And the full devastating aftermath of that tragedy is ongoing. The affected community needs answers and change to make sure that something like this does not happen again. The Trump administration rolled back train safety rules. Now Republicans want to make it easier for polluters to pollute. They put a chemical industry lobbyist in charge of the EPA office in charge of chemical safety. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. They roll back regulations on train brakes. And they reduced rail inspections. And I just want to say one thing to my colleague from Kentucky. I have no problem with releasing all the tapes, but that's not what happened. The Speaker of the House selectively and carefully released them to one person, to one news agency, who then deliberately cherry-picked things to advance a distortion of what happened that day. An insult to the people who work here, an insult to the Capitol Police officers who were injured that day. I mean, that's not transparency. That's propaganda. That is deliberately distorting a horrific event in which this Capitol was attacked. Our democracy was attacked. So please give me a break. Madam Speaker, I'm going to urge that we defeat the previous question, and if we do, I will offer an amendment to the rule to provide for consideration of a resolution that affirms the House's unwavering commitment to protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare, and states that it is the position of the House to reject any cuts in the program. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, Social Security and Medicare are the bedrocks of our nation's social safety net. Yet, as my Republican colleagues demand reckless cuts in exchange for paying our nation's bills, these programs are under threat. Despite recent rhetoric to the contrary, Republicans claim that they won't cut Social Security and Medicare benefits. Well, Madam Speaker, today, Democrats are yet giving Republicans another chance to back up that claim with action by providing them a chance to reassure the American people, not just with their words, but with their votes. And today, they can vote unequivocally that they will not cut these vital programs. Anything short of that is an empty promise. And to discuss our proposal, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Alaska, Ms. Peltola.
Recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the enactment of the Social Security Act in 1935, this country promised Americans that if they worked hard and contributed to the program to support others, when they retire or become disabled or lose a spouse, they will be taken care of too. Social Security helps us provide for retirees, but also disabled workers, widows and widowers, spouses and children. Franklin Delano Roosevelt claimed that Social Security would, quote, promote the common welfare and the economic stability of the nation, and it has. Social Security has kept millions of seniors out of poverty and continues to do so. Today, Social Security provides monthly checks to more than 65 million beneficiaries who rely on it for food and other necessities. For over 85 years now, trusting in the promise of Social Security, millions of Americans have worked hard, paying into the program out of every single paycheck for decades. In 2019, Social Security had helped 31,146 Alaskans stay out of poverty. A report from a few years ago found that without Social Security, the elderly poverty rate in Alaska would have increased from 7.6% to 28%. As of 2021, over 110,000 Alaskans were receiving monthly Social Security benefits, including 84,796 who were 65 and older. In total, that's over 13% of Alaskan residents. I was raised, as I think many others were, with the value of treating elders with great deference and respect, to care for them as they have cared for us. I can think of no better way to do that than to ensure that they have a safe and secure retirement. Simply, this program reflects our values. All Americans deserve to retire with dignity. We must support our senior citizens by strengthening Social Security and not slashing it. We need to protect and expand Social Security. Despite the many demonstrated successes of the Social Security program, there have been no benefit increases to the program in over 50 years. I hear from many Alaskans back home who are scared that they will not receive the Social Security benefits they worked so hard for all their lives. Alaskans worry that the checks they depend on will suddenly disappear, and they have no plan B. They count on receiving this earned benefit that they rely on to pay for essentials like heating. My own monthly heating bill in my hometown of Bethel, Alaska is over $1,000 a month, and my understanding is that is a low bill. People do not deserve to live with this kind of uncertainty and insecurity. That is why safeguarding and reforming Social Security must be a priority for this Congress. Social Security was a solemn promise made to Americans by its government in full faith and credit. I commit to protecting this promise for Alaska and all Americans and implore my colleagues to do the same.
Time has expired.
Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman, does the gentleman reserve? The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the rule which provides consideration for 3 important pieces of legislation to restore trust and certainty for millions of Americans. Specifically, I would like to highlight H.J. Res. 27, which would provide for congressional disapproval of the Biden administration's overreaching New Waters of the United States, or WOTUS, rule that threatens the livelihoods and survival of our nation's farmers and rural communities. The Biden EPA's new reinterpretation of WOTUS is a complete rejection of the Clean Water Act's decades-long, broadly accepted jurisdiction. The new rule gives the federal government sweeping authority over private lands and unleashes the federal regulatory machine on private property owners over bodies of water as small as ditches, low spots, and ephemeral drainages. And God forbid if a farmer is perceived to have violated the EPA's vague new WOTUS regulatory framework, they could find themselves tangled in years of expensive litigation and red tape threatening their very survival as an operation. Now, my district in Western New York in the Southern Tier has over 800 dairy operations. These are generational farms with deep roots in our surrounding communities. And my farmers, as in the case with farmers across this country, they are deeply worried about how the Biden EPA's new WOTUS rule will impact the long-term survival of their operations. Our farmers should be focused on production and growing and maintaining their operations, not hiring outside expensive consultants to help them navigate a maze of new burdensome government regulations. They shouldn't be worried about whether farming a certain part of their land will lead to thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of dollars in penalties, enough to put these family farms out of business. But under the Biden administration, sadly, this is just considered the cost of doing business. Now, some might say I'm speaking in hyperbole, but we've seen this played out before in 2015. We saw that an overly broad interpretation of WOTUS and what it meant to our farmers, many of whom suffered devastating fines from an overzealous Obama-era EPA for having the audacity to manage and farm their own private lands. So the question before us with this resolution isn't how to best regulate a pond versus a stream or a low spot. It isn't how far we should turn the dial up on regulation forward or backward as to not inflict too much pain on rural America. It's a question of whether we stand for the long-term survival of American agriculture and domestic food security, or whether we're willing to regulate the American farmer out of business and out of existence. Congress has a duty to review and oppose this radical interpretation of WOTUS. I strongly support the rule, and I urge my colleagues to do the same, and with that, I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I don't want to be lectured about farms and our farmers. I represent a district with thousands of farms in it. The bottom line is my farmers care about things like clean water. They care about the environment because they know that contaminated water can contaminate the food supply, among other things. My farmers are worried about climate change and the impact it's having on their ability to grow crops. So I don't want to be lectured about farms or what farmers want. I don't know of any farmer who wants to create a situation where polluters basically are not held accountable for the pollution that they cause. I mean, you think about what happened in East Palestine, Ohio. I mean, is it the position of the Republicans that, you know, the railroad should be not required to pay for the damage that they've done? Is that the community should assume those costs? The federal government? I don't know who should pay for it, but are the farmers should pay for that? I mean, come on. So, I mean, we can hear a lot about, oh, you know, this does X, Y, and Z when we know it's an exaggeration. But putting that aside, I just want to say for the record, I represent a lot of farmers. I talk to my farmers all the time. I do farm tours every single year. And what they talk to me about is making sure that we have a clean environment, they have access to clean water, and that we actually start paying attention to climate change, which is destroying their ability to be profitable and to be able to thrive. And with that, I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record an article in the New York Post labeled 10 Myths Told by COVID Experts and Now Debunked by Marty Markry, professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine.
Without objection.
In this article that I've just referenced, misinformation number 7 was that COVID originating from the Wuhan lab is a conspiracy theory. It's not. I think we're going to find that out when this resolution passes, and I expect a lot of Democrat support for the resolution. It passed by unanimous consent in the Senate. Google admitted to suppressing searches of lab leak, quote, lab leak during the pandemic. Dr. Francis Collins, head of the National Institutes of Health, claimed and still does that he doesn't believe the virus came from a lab. Ultimately, overwhelming circumstantial evidence points to a lab leak origin, the same origin suggested to Dr. Anthony Fauci by two very prominent virologists in a January 2020 meeting he assembled at the beginning of the pandemic. According to the documents obtained by Brett Baer of Fox News, they told Fauci and Collins that the virus may have been manipulated and originated in the lab. But then they suddenly changed their tune in public comments days after the meeting with NIH. The virologists were later awarded nearly $9 million from Fauci's agency. Maybe this is why we're not getting the truth yet, but we will get the truth if this rule passes and then the subsequent Senate 619 passes here in the House, and I think it's very important. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is
So, Madam
recognized.
Speaker, I don't think there's any controversy over the bill to make as much of the classified report unclassified that is possible. There's no controversy over that. But I want to make sure people understand, like who's responsible for actually doing the investigation. It was Joe Biden, not the previous president. And I want people to remember what the previous president said. On January 24th, 2020, Donald Trump said, quote, "China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts in transparency. It will all work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Xi." I mean, really? And then on February 7th, 2020, Trump said, "I just spoke with President Xi last night, and you know, we're working on the problem, the virus. It is a very tough situation, but I think he's going to handle it. I think he's handled it really, really well. We're helping wherever we can." And then on February 7th, he said, "Just had a long and very good conversation on the phone with President Xi of China. He's a strong, sharp, and powerfully focused on leading the counterattack on the coronavirus. He feels they are doing very well, even building hospitals in a matter of only days. Great discipline is taking place in China as President Xi strongly leads what will be a very successful operation. We are working closely with China to help." Then he also said, "Late last night, I had a very good talk with President Xi, and we talked about mostly the coronavirus. They're working really hard, and I think they are doing a very professional job. They're in touch with the World Organization, CDC also. We're working together, but World Health is working with them. CDC is working with them. I had a great conversation last night with President Xi. It's a tough situation. I think they're doing a very good job." Then he said on February 10th, "I think China is very, professionally run in the sense that they have everything under control," Trump said. "I really believe they are going to have it under control fairly soon. And in April, supposedly it dies with the hotter weather. And that's a beautiful date to look forward to. But China, I can tell you, is working very hard." On February 13th, he said, "I think they've handled it professionally, and I think they're extremely capable, and I think President Xi is extremely capable, and I hope that it's going to be resolved." On February 23rd, President Trump said, "I think President Xi is working very, very hard. I spoke to him. He's working very hard. I think he's doing a very good job. It's a big problem, but President Xi loves his country. He's working very hard to solve the problem, and he will solve the problem okay." And then on February 29th, he says, "China seems to be making tremendous progress. Their numbers are way down. I think our relationship with China is very, very good. We just had a big trade deal. We're starting on another trade deal with China, a very big one, and we've been working very closely. They've been talking to our people. We've been talking to their people and having to do with the virus." And I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from Politico entitled 15 Times that Trump Praised China as Coronavirus Was Spreading Across the Globe.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I just want to remind my Republican colleagues that the leader of their own party repeatedly applauded China during the peak of the pandemic. And the bottom line is that, we should all be grateful that we have a president now that has actually launched an investigation to get to the bottom of this. And today, hopefully, we will, in a bipartisan way, vote to make as much of that investigation declassified as possible. But let's not forget the history here. And let's not forget who was praising China's reaction to the coronavirus because I think it is important that we keep that in mind, especially listening to some of the rhetoric coming from the other side, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Although it's not the subject of today's resolution or any of the bills covered by this resolution, the Democrats just can't avoid talking about the release of the January 6 videos. They keep going back to it during this debate. I want to remind them that 78% of Democrats out in America support the release of all of these videos. Now, the fact that they're apoplectic about the few minutes of video that Tucker Carlson released on Monday shows that Tucker Carlson is over the target. For 2 years, they've been selectively releasing information and videos to set a narrative. And in just a few minutes, the entire narrative was challenged. I say it collapsed under the scrutiny, under the review of just a few minutes of undoctored video that came from this body. So I applaud Tucker Carlson for releasing that. The American people are right. And the Democrats, if they're so upset that only a few of these videos were released, I would remind them that they were able to release these at any point in the past. Moving on to something that is the subject of this resolution, I want to talk about the repeal of Joe Biden's 2023 WOTUS ruling, Waters of the U.S. ruling. This is, like I said before, it's Groundhog Day again. Under President Bush, we had one set of rules that farmers and home builders and landowners came to understand. Now, they were a little hard to comply with because every division of the Army Corps of Engineers might interpret them differently, or different states would interpret them differently, or different bureaucrats at the EPA would interpret them differently. But then Obama came along with a rule to expand the definition of waters of U.S. And then Trump came into office and the rules changed again. And now Biden is here trying once again to change the rules on what are the waters of the U.S. The farmers and home builders I talk to, they don't say we don't want any regulations. Nobody in this body has said no regulations is what we want. The question is, give us clear, precise, understandable regulations we can follow that do not change. And frankly, those should be written by Congress. They shouldn't be made up by every administration that comes into power, yet that's what we're doing, or that's what's happened. Today, we're talking about repealing those onerous changes and unclear changes. For instance, Susan Bodine testified in front of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee this year on this topic, and she talked about the significant nexus test that they apply in WOTUS 2023, Waters of the U.S., to support expanded jurisdiction under this rule. The agencies now claim that isolated water can affect the biological integrity of navigable water. What does that mean? If you have a puddle of water that a bird lands in and drinks from and takes some seeds or some larvae, and when it drinks and then it flies to a river and deposits it in its bird droppings, or maybe as it flies over the river and it doesn't even visit the river. But if there's any kind of biological connection, and as we found, everything is biologically connected on this planet, if there's any biological connection that they can establish between a puddle of water on your property and a navigable water, then they say this is now covered under Waters of the U.S. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. The only certainty that our farmers and our landowners are going to get from Biden's 2023 WOTUS rule is the certainty that if a raindrop has fallen on your property, a government agent will show up someday and tell you what you can and can't do with that property under this rule. So that's why it's important for us to repeal that, and that's why this resolution is so important. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, this is the second time the gentleman has said that all the tapes of what happened on January 6th were released. Maybe he can tell us where can the general public find them? I mean, how do they get access to them? Yield, yeah.
I never said that. I said you could have released them.
Well, no, you said that I would claim my time. Madam Speaker, the gentleman said that all the tapes had been released. The only person who got the tapes was a political hack at Fox News who used them to distort the reality and the truth and to insult the service of the people who work up here, including our Capitol Police officers. And I'm for releasing as much as can be released so long as it doesn't violate any kind of security protocols. But let's listen to what the U.S. Capitol Police Chief said in response to Tucker Carlson's coverage of January 6th. He said, "Last night, an opinion program aired commentary that was filled with offensive and misleading conclusions about the January 6th attack. The opinion program never reached out to the department to provide accurate context. One false allegation is that our officers helped the rioters and acted as, quote, tour guides. This is outrageous and false. The department stands by the officers in the video that was shown last night. I don't have to remind you how outnumbered our officers were on January 6th. Those officers did their best to use de-escalation tactics to try to talk rioters into getting each other to leave the building. The program conveniently cherry-picked from the calmer moments of our 41,000 hours of video. That commentary fails to provide context about the chaos and violence that happened before or during these less tense moments. Finally, the most disturbing accusation from last night was that our late friend and colleague Brian Sicknick's death had nothing to do with his heroic actions on January 6th. The department maintains, as anyone with common sense would, that had Officer Sicknick not fought valiantly for hours on the day he was violently assaulted, Officer Sicknick would not have died the next day. And as some people select from 41,000 hours of video clips that seemingly support their narrative they want to push, those of you who were here on January 6th, those of you who were in the fight, those of you who ensured that no member of Congress was hurt, those of you who contributed to the effort to allow this country's legislative process to continue, know firsthand what actually happened. And I would just simply say, Madam Speaker, if we want to make sure that we do not see another January 6th ever occur again in our country's future, well, then we all ought to speak with one voice and condemn what happened that day and characterize it for what it was, an attack on our democracy. And I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Well, I surely didn't expect this to turn into a debate on the January 6th videotapes or to hear the Democrats propose that it sounds like they're in favor of all of the tapes being released instead of just some of them. I think if the gentleman will review the transcript, and I could be wrong, but I think he'll find out that I said Tucker Carlson only released a few minutes of that, and those few minutes were able to destroy the narrative that had been constructed over 2 years. But if the gentleman cares to answer a question, maybe we've come to some bipartisan agreement that all of the tapes should be released. Would the gentleman be in favor of? I would ask if the gentleman, when he speaks next, if he would speak to that topic, if he would be in favor of releasing all of the tapes instead of releasing them partially at times. No. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, when the gentleman says that what Tucker Carlson aired somehow destroyed the narrative, I mean, give me a break. I mean, essentially, basically saying what happened on January 6th conforms with what Tucker Carlson said. It is offensive to everybody who was here that day. It is offensive to the staff. It is offensive to the Capitol Police officers. It is offensive to everybody. I mean, come on. I mean, Madam Speaker, let me just say to the gentleman, what I said before was that I favored releasing tapes so long as they did not, that's my personal opinion, so as it did not at all compromise any security. That's what I said. But I really, I mean, it is so sad to be on this House floor after what happened on that day and to hear members of Congress basically try to cover up the horrendous atrocity that occurred that day, the attack on our democracy. I mean, it is shameful. I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I reserve.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
May I inquire of the gentleman how many more speakers he has?
Just myself.
Are you prepared to
I'm
close?
prepared. Is the gentleman prepared to close?
I am.
I'm prepared to close.
Madam Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 5.5 minutes remaining.
Madam Speaker, what's just as revealing as what we're debating this week is what we're not talking about. We're now 3 months into the Republican majority. They haven't passed a single bill into law yet. And in fact, rather than debating things that people care about, we're spending week after week passing bills that are designed to get Facebook likes and retweets instead of making an actual difference for the people back home. 3 out of 4 Americans say the Republicans in Congress do not have the right agenda. And if you want proof that they're right, look no further than what so much of today's debate was focused on. Democrats passed bills to bring jobs back from China and take on Putin's war of aggression. Republicans are passing bills to make it easier for Russia and China to spread their propaganda here in the United States. Democrats passed laws holding polluters accountable, took action to get rid of lead pipes and clean up our rivers and lakes. Republicans are passing bills to protect the polluters that dump toxic chemicals into our water. The American people expect more. They expect us to pass bills that actually matter to our families. Democrats have been putting people over politics to do it. We get stuff done while Republicans are chasing down the approval of hyper-online far right that spends all their time on Twitter trying to own the libs. So that is why I'm asking my colleagues to join me in defeating the previous question so we can get this House on record as saying that we are going to protect Social Security and Medicare. And finally, Madam Speaker, again, the idea that the leadership on the Republican side was complicit with Fox News, with Tucker Carlson, to spread lies and distortions about what happened on January 6th, to insult the service of the brave men and women who protect this building and all of us who are in it, is unconscionable. And I would just like, it would be so refreshing for Republicans to join us in condemning the distortions that were on Fox News. I mean, it is stunning to me that we can't get any of them to condemn. Some of your Senate counterparts did, and I praise them for it, but the silence here is deafening, and it is offensive. It is offensive. And with that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Well, somewhat serendipitous, but in the context of this debate on a rule about other bills, it seems we've come to some agreement, it appears to me, with the American people, 81% of whom believe that all of the tapes should be released. It seems like we've come to some agreement that we'd all be better off if we get to the bottom of the truth and all of the truth comes out and all of the tapes come out so that no one side can distort what actually happened that day. And then let the American people decide. So I will not. The gentleman's time's expired. So Senate, in the interest of transparency and in the interest of getting back to the subject matter at hand, which are 3 bills covered by this rule, I want to talk about Senate Bill 619, which is so important. It's transparency, and it's the transparency that the American people deserve. It passed by unanimous consent in the Senate. Even though it seems like there's some opposition on the other side, I suspect we're going to get a lot of votes from Democrats on Senate Bill 619. And I think it's important to go on the record for people to say whether or not for elected representatives to say whether or not they believe their constituents are entitled to the truth which our government possesses, or at least information that they possess that would help somebody come to a conclusion on what the origins of this virus were and did they come from Wuhan. So the president could do this at any time. He could have done it at any time in the past 2 years. He hasn't done it. It's time to put him on the spot and say, you either veto this, and I suspect we could overcome his veto, but you either veto this or you release that information that you've withheld from the American public for 2 years, which is too long. Next, I want to talk about the Waters of the U.S. rule. Why is this timely? Because on March 20th, this goes into effect. That's why it is so urgent to repeal the 2023 Waters of the U.S. rule. Was it written? These are laws. Were they written by lawmakers? No. Our founding fathers created three branches of government. You've got the executive branch, which enforces laws. You've got the judicial branch, which resolves disputes. And you've got the legislative branch, which is supposed to make the laws. Yet, here we sit, abdicating that authority, that responsibility. You could delegate authority. You can't delegate responsibility. We have a responsibility to the American people to make sure that these laws are concise, that they don't change on the whim of an executive who gets in the White House, that they are not onerous, and that they have their intended effect, and that they are applied uniformly across the country. Yet we have abdicated that responsibility, but we will take that responsibility back by the passage of this rule and the subsequent legislation to repeal the Waters of the U.S. 2023 by Joe Biden. The American people deserve that. And finally, I want to close by talking about H.R. 140. This is a bill that went through regular order. What a wonderful thing. We've talked about it so much. It's a bill that covers one topic only. We've talked about that so much. And here we are. And we've even got a chance, even though it was amended in the committee, we've got a chance to amend it here on the floor, to perfect it even more for members who aren't members of that committee. Are these amendments that are not germane? Are these the kind of amendments that the American people hate, where you offer an amendment and you stick something into a bill that's completely unrelated to it? No, every one of these amendments is germane to this bill. We have made sure of that in the Rules Committee. I will not yield. The gentleman's time's expired, and he serves on the Rules Committee, and he had plenty of time to voice his concerns there. So we've got a lot of amendments that are great. I think they'll improve the bill, but what's most important is people have a chance to have their point made and to get a vote on this. So finally, I want to talk about what H.R. 140 would fix. It would fix this loophole that they think they've constructed that allows the federal government to violate the Constitution. Obviously, the federal agents can't take away your First Amendment rights, and obviously, social media companies aren't subject. The Constitution wasn't meant to bind them. It was meant to bind the administration. And what we have is a loophole where the administration leans on a social media company that they are paying money to. Millions of dollars have gone to these social media companies from CDC, from FBI. So when they say, would you pretty please ban this user? Would you pretty please take down these posts or a whole series of these posts? The government doesn't get in line. They've got a back door that they can trot to every day and submit lists of people who they think should be banned because they don't like what they've said. This is dangerous to our republic. If the other side wants to call it a democracy, it's dangerous to the democracy, but this is a republic. Our government has built an elaborate but constitutionally unsound framework for violating these natural rights. As we've seen with the Twitter files, they boldly work in close cooperation with private sector actors who aren't subject to constitutional restrictions imposed on government by our founders. But they also claim foreign influence and national security, so they can target U.S. citizens and with agencies of the government under the military chain of command, whose missions are ostensibly directed at foreign actors who have no constitutional rights. Elected lawmakers be damned. Legions of government lawyers create shaky legal scaffolding and ad hoc doctrine to indemnify the actors within our government who eagerly exploit these loopholes. In this way, government actors can claim everything they do is illegal. They've got a bunch of lawyers to back. Oh, we didn't do anything illegal. It's all legal. Here, look at our doctrine. We've got the lawyers have gone through it. It's all legal. Here's the problem. Much of what they do is unconstitutional. So whose job is it to resolve that difference? It's actually not the Supreme Court's job. We are entrusted with oversight. We all here swore an oath to the Constitution. And if we know that authorizations that we've made or that funding that we have appropriated has been twisted in a way to get around the Constitution or to drive through a loophole that some lawyers in the administrative branch have created, that it is our obligation, we owe it to the American people, we swore an oath to the Constitution to fix that. Not to make them go to court to get some remedy, but to fix it, to stop it in its tracks. H.R. 140, with its pending amendments, is a good down payment on that promise to the American people. And with that, I support this rule. I urge my colleagues to vote for it. And Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution as amended.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the
gentleman
yeas and
from
nays.
Massachusetts is recognized.
I ask for the yeas and nays so we can protect Social Security.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are
Mr. Himes. Mr. Himes votes no. Ms. DeLauro. Ms. DeLauro voted no. Mr. Hudson. Mr. Hudson votes aye.